Namaste and welcome. If you have ever wondered whether a practice like mantra yoga can truly change anything meaningful in real life, not just give you a few peaceful moments, not just sound beautiful, not just feel spiritual for a little while, but actually change the quality of how you think, feel, respond, work, and live, then this episode is for you. Because today I want to speak about what begins to change when a person practices a mantra sincerely over time, not in an exaggerated way, not in a fantasy driven way, and not in a way that turns spiritual practice into a marketing claim. I want to speak about it truthfully because the most meaningful transformations in life are often not loud in the beginning. They are subtle, but they are very deep. And if you are a busy professional, a high capacity person, someone carrying a lot mentally, emotionally, or energetically, these subtle changes can become life changing over time. I want to speak about this from a place of lived experience. I was not introduced to mantra as a trend or a late life experiment. From around the age of 10, I grew up in Vedic monastic educational environments where chanting, sacred sound, discipline, prayer, inner order, and spiritual culture were woven into everyday life. So for me, mantra has never been merely a technique, it has been part of the structure of daily living. Hmm. Later, life also took me deeply into modern academia, scientific training, research, and professional performance culture. I went through multiple advanced degrees, including rigorous work in statistics, bioinformatics and genomics, and doctoral training, and I also worked in public health and medical research environments in the United States. So I have seen very closely what intense intellectual life can sharpen, and I have also seen what it can cost. I have seen how capable people become inwardly overloaded, how high achievers become emotionally dry, how strong professionals become mentally noisy, how outward success can coexist with inward depletion. And I have also seen, both in my own life and in the lives of others, that sincere mantra practice begins to change this from the inside out, not by making a person less capable, but by making them more coherent. And coherence is one of the most underrated forms of power in modern life. So let us talk about what begins to change. The first thing often begins to change is the texture of the mind. Before practice becomes steady, many people live inside a mind that feels crowded. There is too much commentary, too much replay, too much mental pressure, too much internal speed, too much involuntary thinking. Even when external life appears manageable, the inner environment feels noisy. What mantra begins to do is not necessarily erase thought overnight, it changes your relationship to thought. This is a very important distinction. You may still have responsibilities, you may still have decisions to make, you may still have problems to solve, but the mind gradually becomes less sticky, less compulsive, less scattered, less available to hijack. There begins to be a little more space between you and your mental turbulence, a little more space between stimulus and reaction, a little more space between emotion and expression, a little more space between pressure and panic. That space is not empty, that space holds power. Because when there is no space, life drives you. When there is space, you begin to live more consciously. That is one of the first profound gifts of mantra. The second thing that begins to change is your baseline emotional state. Many people do not realize how much of their life is being lived in subtle emotional overactivation. They may not be having dramatic breakdowns, but inwardly there is strain, a low grade irritability, a subtle heaviness, and emotional fatigue, an inability to recover properly, a tendency to react quickly, a sense of carrying too much for too long. What mantra often begins to restore is not emotional numbness, but emotional steadiness. You do not become flat, you become less tossed around. You do not become indifferent, you become less internally fragile. You do not stop feeling, you start feeling from a more grounded center. This matters immensely for busy professionals because many people today are not failing because they lack intelligence. They are suffering because their inner system is carrying too much unresolved agitation. And when that agitation remains high, everything feels harder than it should. Conversations become heavier. Small problems feel bigger. Rest does not feel restful. Decision making becomes more draining. Relationships become more reactive. Mantra begins to soften this field. It begins to reduce the unnecessary internal friction that makes life more exhausting than it needs to be. The third thing that begins to change is your energy coherence. This is a major one. In modern life, many people think they have an energy problem when what they really have is an energy leakage problem. Their vitality is constantly draining through overstimulation, overthinking, emotional entanglement, digital overload, irregular rhythm, speech excess, and the absence of inner grounding. So they say things like, I have no energy. I feel depleted all the time. I feel flat. I wake up tired. I cannot sustain my focus. And yes, sometimes there are physical reasons too. But often there is also profound energetic incoherence. Mantra helps reorganize that. Again, not always dramatically at first, but steadily. Because sacred sound, repeated with attention and sincerity, begins to gather what has become scattered. It gives your breath a steadier cadence. It gives your attention a cleaner channel. It reduces wasteful mental movement. It gives your inner life a more ordered rhythm. And gradually, you begin to feel less leaked, less diffused, less dispersed, less inwardly fragmented. That is when people often say, I do not know how to explain it, but I feel more together. I feel less scattered. I feel more centered. I feel like I'm coming back to myself. That return to coherence is one of the deepest forms of renewal. The fourth thing that begins to change is reactivity. And this is huge because many people do not know how reactive they are until they become slightly less reactive. They assume that the speed of their irritation, anxiety, defensiveness, overwhelm, or impatience is just normal. Then a sincere practice enters the system, and slowly the gap begins to widen. The email that would have unsettled you so deeply no longer dominates your whole nervous system. The comment that would have stayed in your head for hours begins to pass more quickly. The inconvenience that would have disturbed your entire mood begins to lose some of its power. Did- This does not mean you become spiritually detached in a cold way. It means your center strengthens. You begin living less from impulse and more from rootedness. That is real power, not domination, not aggression, not intensity, inner power. The kind that allows you to remain present without being so easily thrown off your axis. The fifth thing that begins to change is something I find especially beautiful: a sense of inward companionship returns. This is subtle, but for many people, it is one of the most healing aspects of the practice. Before practice deepens, many high achievers feel inwardly alone, even when they are surrounded by people, even when they are successful, even when they are functioning. There is a kind of inner isolation that comes from living too long only through effort, thought, and responsibility. Life starts to feel like constant management. But a mantra introduces another quality: a felt sense that you are no longer living only inside your own mental noise, a felt sense that something sacred is present, a felt sense that your inner world is becoming inhabitable again, a felt sense that silence is no longer empty but nourishing. This is very hard to explain to someone who has never tested it. But once a person begins to experience it, something in them remembers: I do not have to live only from pressure. I do not have to be accompanied only by my thoughts. There is a deeper current available. And for many people, that alone begins changing the emotional atmosphere of life. The sixth thing that begins to change is your relationship to meaning. This is very important. When the mind is noisy and the nervous system is strained, life often becomes mechanical. You wake up, you execute, you solve, you respond, you complete, you manage, you repeat. Even your achievements can start feeling procedural rather than alive. Mantra begins to restore a sense of sacredness to life, not sentimentally, but experientially. You begin to feel moments more fully, breath more fully, speech more carefully, presence more deeply. There is a subtle shift from merely moving through life to actually inhabiting life. That changes the quality of work, the quality of relationships, the quality of choices, the quality of self respect. Because a life with inner sacredness is not merely efficient, it is alive. Now, I want to make something very clear. These changes do not come from casual contact alone, they come from sincerity, consistency, and correct orientation. Mantra is not a superficial hack. It is not just saying sacred sounds while remaining inwardly careless. Its deeper gifts begin to unfold when practice becomes real, when it is respected, when it is repeated, when attention participates, when sound is approached carefully, when the practice is held with humility and steadiness. This is why I care not only about inspiration, but about proper guidance. Because transformation is not only about being moved by the idea of a mantra, it is about being shaped by the discipline of practicing it. And in my own life, one of the reasons I value this so deeply is because I have seen that both spiritual depth and scientific rigor ask for something similar: repeated, honest engagement. Not random intensity, not performance, not impression, steadiness, method, depth, integrity instead. That is where real change begins. So, if I had to summarize what starts to change through sincere mantra practice, I would say this: the mind becomes less noisy, the emotions become less turbulent, energy becomes more coherent, reactivity begins to soften, inner companionship begins to return, life begins to feel more meaningful and more inhabited. And over time, what looked like a simple practice begins to reveal itself as something much greater, a way of reorganizing life from within, a way of recovering inner power without becoming harsh, a way of becoming more peaceful without becoming passive, a way of becoming more inwardly alive while still living fully in the world. That is a profound gift. And if you are someone who has been functioning outwardly while feeling inwardly strained, I want you to know this: change is possible. Not because you force yourself harder, but because you begin relating to your inner life differently. That is where genuine transformation starts. So today, I want to leave you with one reflection. If I stayed with sincere sacred practice long enough, what kind of person might I become from the inside? More clear, more steady, more rooted, more compassionate, more powerful in the truest sense, more able to live without constant inner friction? Sit with that, because sometimes the deepest invitation is not to achieve more, it is to become more internally wholesome. And if today's episode resonated with you, I want to warmly invite you to my upcoming 2-hour live workshop on mantra yoga, precision chanting, and daily sadhana for busy professionals. The link to register for the same is provided in the description and in the pinned comment of this video. In that workshop, I will go deeper into what actually changes through practice, how to approach mantra in a grounded and authentic way, and how to begin creating these shifts in your own life with more clarity and guidance. And for those who stay until the end, I will also share how you can continue this journey with me at a deeper level if that feels aligned for you. So, click on the link in the description or in the pinned comment below and reserve your spot today. Also, as a small heartfelt gesture for this podcast community, I'm keeping a 10% community coupon available for only the first 25 people who register through this invitation. Offer applicable as long as it lasts. My invitation serves, of course, not as pressure, but as a sincere welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with depth. And thank you for honoring the possibility that your inner life can become not only quieter, but stronger, steadier, and more sacred. Until next time, may your return to yourself become the source of your deepest strength. Namaste.